You can imagine how impressive this would have been. Just the scale, it's amazing. This was happening some 800 years ago.
Exactly.
On this island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
I'm in the center of this massive body of water, the Pacific Ocean.
Scientists have scanned beneath Nan Madol, and what they found challenges every prior assumption about the site. Picture a stone city the size of a small town, built on a coral reef in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from anywhere, abandoned and silent for centuries. For over 100 years, no one could adequately explain how it was constructed or how such a complex had survived. Then researchers deployed modern instruments, a survey aircraft firing lasers through dense jungle canopy, divers descending with sonar equipment, and a National Geographic team wielding a portable X-ray fluorescence device at an ancient royal tomb. When the data came back, what it revealed was not supposed to be possible, not in this location, not at this scale. This is the story of Nan Madol, long called the Venice of the Pacific. Geography and the problem of place. To understand the mystery, one must first understand the geography, because the setting is the central problem. Nan Madol sits just off the eastern shore of Pohnpei, a single high island in the Federated States of Micronesia, deep in the western Pacific Ocean. There is no nearby continent. There is no neighboring city. In every direction lies open ocean. And yet, rising out of a shallow lagoon, there is a city. Nan Madol was the residence of the ruling Sotalar dynasty, constructed and occupied roughly 600 to 800 years ago. The engineering knowledge required to build a city in open water would, by any measure, be extraordinary. The site's remoteness is not incidental to its significance, it is the whole point. The Pacific contains thousands of inhabited islands, but none of them produced anything structurally comparable to this. The distance from any major continental landmass is not merely a geographical fact. It is the condition that makes every aspect of the city's construction harder to explain and, ultimately, more impressive. The city was not built on land. It was built on the sea itself. Nan Madol is a network of artificial islets, platforms of stacked stone and coral fill laid across a coral reef flat and separated by a grid of tidal canals. The walled site core encloses an area roughly 1.5 kilometers by half a kilometer, and packed within it sit approximately 92 man-made islands. Every observer who has stood before the ruins reaches for the same comparison, and it has held for generations, the Venice of the Pacific. The name fits precisely. One did not walk through Nan Madol. Movement through the city was by canoe, gliding down lanes of dark water between walls of dark basalt stone. Those canals were not decorative. They constituted the streets, the transport infrastructure, and the mechanism that allowed the movement of stone, food, and people through a city that had no dry roads, because there was no dry land beneath it on which roads could be laid. The entire complex spreads across an archaeological district covering more than 18 square kilometers along the shore of Temwan Island and the adjacent Pohnpei coastline. That is not a monument. That is an urban plan. The name itself encodes this reality. Nan Madol means, within the intervals, a direct reference to the canals threading between the ruins. This was the ceremonial and political capital of the Sotalar dynasty, the first power to unite the people of Pohnpei under a single ruler, governing an island population estimated at around 25,000. Only a small portion of what was once the full extent of the city remains visible. Human activity at the site extends back nearly 2,000 years, with islet construction having begun by roughly the 8th or 9th century CE. Then, around 1180 CE, something shifted, and the builders began moving stone on a scale that still defies comfortable explanation. Most accounts frame the mystery incorrectly. The puzzle was never whether something extraordinary happened on this reef. The walls are plainly visible. Millions of tons of black volcanic stone were stacked into a city on the water in a location where no city should exist. The real question was always quieter and more demanding: what made it possible? What sustained such a population? What surrounded the city that no one could see? For a century, no one could answer those questions. Because the answers lay hidden under tidal mud, under 25 meters of seawater, and behind a wall of jungle thick enough to conceal entire landscapes. An urban plan on the water. The internal layout of Nan Madol reveals sophisticated spatial planning. The city was zoned. The mortuary district held dozens of islets, many once occupied by priests. Individual islets had dedicated functions, one for food preparation, one for canoe construction, one for coconut oil production. High-walled tombs clustered on specific islets. The most imposing of all is Nandawas, the royal mortuary island, where walls standing between roughly 5.5 and 7.5 meters tall enclose a central tomb inside a courtyard. This is not the work of people improvising. This is the execution of a deliberate plan. The site was reserved exclusively for the ruling elite. It represents the only period in Pohnpeian history governed by a single centralized ruler, a political arrangement closer to autocracy than to the distributed chieftaincy that came before and after. That ruler could command the labor of an entire island population in service of construction. There is also a colder political logic embedded in the design. Nan Madol may have functioned in part as a mechanism of control, compelling potential rivals and challenger chiefs to reside within the city, directly beneath the ruler's observation, rather than remaining in their home districts, where their activities and alliances could not be monitored. A stone city on the water that simultaneously served as the most sophisticated surveillance architecture of its era. The problem of the stone snow aspect of Nan Madol has unsettled observers more consistently than the basalt. The city is built from long, naturally formed columns of basalt, volcanic rock that cooled into roughly hexagonal pillars, some of them stacked in a log cabin configuration into walls exceeding 7 meters in height. The stones are not small. The average column weighs approximately 5 tons. The largest reach an estimated 50 tons. The total mass of basalt transported to build this city has been estimated at up to 750,000 metric tons. That figure deserves sustained attention. 750,000 tons of stone. Set that number against the geography and the difficulty sharpens considerably. The basalt did not originate at the building site. It was quarried from a volcanic plug on the opposite side of Pohnpei, then transported across the island and out onto an open reef. Carbon dating places the start of megalithic construction at approximately 1180 CE. The work continued in phases for centuries. One estimate preserved in the site's own heritage documentation calculates that the builders quarried, transported, and laid roughly 2,000 tons of stone every single year for 3 to 4 centuries, without pulleys, without metal tools, without wheels, and without draft animals. 2,000 tons per year, by hand, sustained over 400 years. The construction technique itself offers evidence that these were not simply laborers stacking rocks. The walls employ a heteran-stretcher method, columns laid in alternating directions, lengthwise then crosswise, using the same interlocking geometry that gives a log cabin its structural integrity. And critically, no mortar binds Nan Madol together. None at all. The entire structure stands on sheer mass and the geometry of how the basalt logs interlock, with coral fill and boulders consolidating the cores of the islets and the seawalls. This is not stacking. It is engineering, an applied understanding of load, friction, and balance executed at monumental scale by people working in stone and coral with no metal implements whatsoever. The decision to forego mortar was not a limitation. It was a structural solution, one that allowed for slight movement and settlement across a reef substrate without catastrophic failure, and one that has demonstrably worked. Because the walls are still standing after 8 centuries of Pacific weather and seismic activity, the brute arithmetic never added up under the old isolated ruin model. A society capable of feeding, housing, and directing a massive sustained workforce in a location that supposedly had almost no food production or fresh water on the construction site itself presents a fundamental contradiction. Those two facts cannot coexist without something missing from the picture. The workforce had to eat. The administrators had to be provisioned. The priests, craftspeople, and laborers who kept this city functioning across multiple generations required a reliable, large-scale food supply, and no credible account of where that supply came from had ever been offered. That missing element is precisely what modern instruments eventually located. The legend and its uses before the instruments, there were the oral traditions, and the traditions preserved something important. Pohnpeian legend holds that Nan Madol was raised by twin sorcerers, Olasopa and Olasopa, who came from across the sea seeking a location to build an altar to the god of agriculture. In the tradition, the brothers lifted immense stones into position with the help of a flying dragon and supernatural force. When Olasopa died, Olasopa became the first Sauteleur, married a local woman, and founded the dynasty. It is a founding myth, but it encodes 2 verifiable truths. The people of Pohnpei always understood this place as one of immense effort and concentrated power, and any explanation offered had to feel as large as the ruins demanded. The legend is also structurally honest about the difficulty of what was accomplished. It does not minimize the scale of the undertaking. It reaches for the most powerful explanatory framework available within its cultural context, which is precisely what any account of Nan Madol is still compelled to do. Outside observers seized on that scale and took it in an unwarranted direction. Nan Madol was absorbed into claims about lost continents, Lemuria, and into pseudo-archaeological frameworks that implicitly questioned who could really have built it. None of that has any scientific foundation. Specialists in Pacific archaeology have firmly rejected such claims, noting that denying the Pohnpeian people credit for Nan Madol draws on some of the oldest and most thoroughly discredited intellectual traditions in the field. The legend itself records the dynasty's eventual unraveling. The founding rulers, tradition says, governed with relative restraint, but their successors imposed progressively heavier demands on the population. That reign ended with an invasion, after which the site continued in use before eventually being abandoned entirely, emptied out after 4 centuries of relentless labor. For reasons that scholars still debate, ranging from political collapse to sharp demographic decline. Whatever happened, the canals went quiet, and the jungle advanced. It would hold those secrets for a very long time in global recognition, long delayed, a fact that reframes the entire history of the site. The world barely agreed on its significance until recently. The ruins were declared a United States National Historic Landmark in 1985. It was not until 2016 that UNESCO inscribed Nan Madol on the World Heritage List, designating it the ceremonial center of Eastern Micronesia. A site this monumental, this architecturally unusual, and the formal international recognition is more recent than many people alive today. This is not a site that was fully documented a century ago and filed away. Its most significant discoveries were still actively emerging from the ground and from beneath the jungle canopy within the last decade, revealed by technology that did not exist when the first archaeologists first moved through these canals. The implication is worth sitting with. If formal recognition came only in 2016, and if the agricultural landscape surrounding the city was not identified until 2019, then the scholarly understanding of Nan Madol is, in a genuine and measurable sense, still in its early stages. The site has been accumulating new meaning faster in the past decade than in the previous century combined, the lasers in the sky for most of its modern history. Nan Madol was protected from thorough investigation by a single obstacle, the jungle. The site and the surrounding terrain, including neighboring Temwan Island, lie buried under dense tropical vegetation so thick that an observer standing among the ruins cannot discern the full shape of what surrounds them. From ground level, and even from conventional aerial photography, the jungle defeated every attempt at comprehensive mapping. Then came March 2019. Over 2 days, the 11th and 12th, an airborne LiDAR survey flew over Nan Madol and Temwan Island. An aircraft flew back and forth at an average altitude of approximately 457 meters, covering roughly 8.69 square kilometers, firing rapid laser pulses straight down into the canopy. The project was planned and overseen by the Cultural Site Research and Management Foundation and flown by a Hawaii-based aerial surveying company. Funded through a conservation initiative supported by the U.S. Department of State's Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation. LiDAR works by measuring the elapsed time of each laser pulse's return. Enough pulses penetrate small gaps in the forest canopy that, with appropriate processing, the vegetation layer can be stripped away digitally to produce a model of the bare ground beneath. The survey team constructed several types of models. Some rendered the forest canopy. Others did something transformative. They revealed the surface beneath the trees that had been concealing the landscape for generations. Under those trees, the laser detected features that had never been mapped. What the scan revealed, what emerged from the 2019 data, was not additional stone ruins. It was an entirely different category of discovery. The models exposed a complex irrigated cultivation system across Temwan Island, the first such system ever identified in the Central and Eastern Caroline Islands. The laser surface models revealed subtle features the jungle had hidden from view: low, wet, cultivable areas spread across the island, many of them connected by water channels or delineated by earthen berms, channels, and raised earthworks through which water moved precisely. Where human planners directed it, the research team did not rely solely on remote sensing imagery. In the summer of 2019, investigators returned to the field and conducted ground truth surveys on Temwan Island, confirming that the physical features identified by the laser were genuinely present on the ground. The berms themselves, researchers noted, may also have served as cultivated surfaces. This was not a scattered garden. This was an engineered agricultural landscape. The technique that made the invisible visible is itself worth understanding. The raw laser data was processed through grayscale multidirectional hillshade models, a method that simulates raking light across the bare Earth's surface from multiple directions simultaneously. A shallow berm, an old water channel, the faint geometric regularity of a managed field, features that the human eye would never detect beneath a forest canopy, appear suddenly as shadow and relief when the trees are computationally removed and the ground is illuminated from every angle. The detected features appeared not only across Temwan but also on the islets of Nan Madol itself. The jungle had not destroyed the agricultural infrastructure. It had simply been concealing it. This work was published in peer-reviewed form in 2019 in the journal Remote Sensing. The researchers concluded that the cultivation system is comparable in scale to Nan Madol itself. The hidden farming landscape required labor investment on the same order of magnitude as constructing the stone city. It appears to have been capable of producing substantial food surpluses, enough for consumption, for ceremonial feasting, and for redistribution or long-distance exchange. If this engineered landscape dates to the era of the Sotalar dynasty, the research opens entirely new questions about the economic foundation that sustained Nan Madol's regional dominance. The scan did not merely uncover additional ruins. It may have found the engine that fed the city, an engine that had been sitting beside the famous walls the entire time. Invisible beneath the trees, what impossible actually means. This is where the scale of the revision becomes clear. And it has nothing to do with speculative explanations. The assumption carried forward for over a century was straightforward and seemingly reasonable. A monumental stone capital on a remote Pacific reef operated under a fundamental constraint. On the islets of Nan Madol itself, there is no fresh water and no ground on which to grow food. The traditional interpretation was correspondingly stark. The ruling class survived on supplies carried by boat from the main island. The city was conceived as an island of concentrated power surrounded by logistical emptiness, kept viable by tribute transported across the water. Place the LiDAR findings over that interpretation. Directly adjacent, on Temwan Island, buried under generations of jungle growth, lies an engineered, irrigated, water-managed agricultural system on a scale comparable to the city it supplied. That is not the signature of an isolated ceremonial outpost stranded on a reef. That is the signature of a planned, integrated economy, terrain deliberately reshaped, water deliberately routed, food production deliberately organized and scaled. The researcher's own characterization of what surrounds Nan Madol is precise and significant: a vast archaeological landscape. A vast archaeological landscape on an island the majority of the world has never encountered, hidden in plain sight beside one of the most extensively studied ruins in the Pacific. That is the thing that was not supposed to exist under every previous framework for understanding the site. And it is completely, verifiably real. The tomb and the X-ray device. Several years before the aerial survey, a different question was being pursued at ground level. A National Geographic expedition led by archaeologist Mark McCoy of Southern Methodist University positioned itself at Nandawas, the Great Walled Royal Tomb that oral tradition identifies as the burial site of the first chief to rule all of Pohnpei. McCoy carried a portable X-ray fluorescence device, which he described as resembling something from a mid-century science fiction serial. The instrument fires X-rays at a stone surface and reads the resulting chemical signature without physically disturbing the material. Paired with this technique was uranium-thorium series dating, a method considerably more precise than the radiocarbon dating previously applied to the site. When the results were returned, the dates were earlier than expected, by a full century. The analysis indicated that construction of the monumental tomb began by approximately 1180 CE, with the interred chief placed there only about 20 years after construction commenced. This pushed the rise of this powerful centralized dynasty more than 100 years earlier than prior scholarship had assumed. The conclusion that followed was larger than a revised date. Nan Madol appears to be the earliest known location in the Pacific Islands to have been governed by a single paramount chief, the earliest monumental burial site of its kind anywhere in the remote Pacific. McCoy articulated the significance with clarity. The kind of centralized political organization in which most contemporary societies operate did not emerge without antecedents. Its roots lie in pre-modern societies exactly like this one, where a single chief came to rule over a previously fragmented population. Tribes and bands preceded chiefdoms. Chiefdoms preceded states. That transition is rarely preserved in well-dated physical form. Nan Madol, with its precisely dated royal tomb, offers exactly such a window into that transition. The X-ray device was not hunting artifacts. It documented the moment a Pacific Island society invented a new model of political organization and recorded it in stone. What lies beneath the water, one final frontier remains. One that is bound most closely to legend. Local Pohnpeian tradition speaks of two submerged prehistoric cities offshore, Konam Weso and Konam Widek. Over the following decades after the ruins' modern rediscovery, divers investigated. In 1978 and 1979, archaeologist Arthur Sachs descended into the waters adjacent to Nan Madol, following reports of submerged basalt columns and searching for those legendary lost cities. His divers surfaced with something remarkable: tall, coral-encrusted stone pillars, some reaching 6 meters in height, resting at depths exceeding 25 meters. Neither legendary city was located. A hypothesis advanced afterward suggested that an ancient settlement might have stood over a cavern that subsequently collapsed into a blue hole. Taking the structures with it, then came the more systematic investigation. In 1988 and 1989, a University of Oregon team conducted an underwater survey of the waters surrounding Nan Madol and found prone basalt columns on the seafloor. Their conclusion was that these were lost, discarded, or fallen construction materials, not the remnants of a sunken city. They returned to Sachs's pillars, drove a steel rod into two of them, and found only coral. They raised one and examined it in cross-section. It proved to be composed entirely of coral, a natural formation that the reef had produced independently, not a deliberately placed stone column. In 2013, a team led by Ishimura returned with multi-beam sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and scuba divers to examine the submerged block-shaped features and the blue hole directly. Their conclusion was unambiguous: no man-made basalt pillars, no evidence that any of the underwater columns are artificial. The blue hole, they determined, is a natural sinkhole formed in reef limestone during the reduced sea levels of past ice ages. This matters precisely because of what it demonstrates about the integrity of the broader scientific record. Certain accounts claimed Nan Madol concealed a submerged ancient civilization. Repeated, independent scientific surveys rejected those specific claims. There is no underwater lost city. The significance of that honesty is this: the same methodological rigor that dismantled the underwater city hypothesis is what gives the LiDAR discovery its weight. The aerial survey findings were produced by researchers who report what their instruments indicate, including when the instruments say no. A scientific community willing to abandon a dramatic hypothesis when the evidence fails to support it is precisely the kind of community whose affirmative findings carry credibility. When those same investigators state that the laser revealed a vast engineered agricultural landscape beside Nan Madol, that finding is not promotional amplification. It is a result that has withstood systematic scrutiny. It emerged from the same process that eliminated the sunken city, and it survived that process intact. What the instruments change: place two interpretive frameworks side by side and examine what has occurred. The old framework: Nan Madol was an isolated ceremonial ruin, a remarkable stone city stranded on a reef, dependent on outside supply, surrounded by undeveloped terrain. Explained largely through speculation and local tradition, the framework produced by modern instrumentation, Nan Madol was the monumental core of a deliberately engineered regional landscape. Around 1180 CE, a Pacific Island society invented centralized political rule, recorded the event in a precisely dated royal tomb, and proceeded to move 750,000 tons of basalt onto a reef over subsequent centuries. The element the jungle concealed until 2019, the builders simultaneously reshaped the neighboring terrain into an irrigated agricultural system, organized and labor-intensive enough to rival the city itself, capable of sustaining a population, supporting ceremonial feasting, and facilitating trade and redistribution. LiDAR stripped away the canopy. Sonar and systematic diving cleared away the speculative claims. A portable X-ray device and uranium-thorium dating together anchored the precise chronology. Each instrument pointed in the same direction, away from isolated and inexplicable, toward organized, planned, and significantly more sophisticated than anyone had previously determined. The enduring mystery of Nan Madol was never that its existence was impossible. The genuine mystery is how much more there was than anyone could see, and how much of it was positioned directly beside the famous ruins, the entire time, waiting beneath the trees. Each new technology trained on the site has returned a version of the same correction, larger, more integrated, more deliberate than the previous estimate. 4 centuries. Nan Madol was understood as an isolated ruin in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Modern scanning technology has revealed something considerably more significant. A hidden engineered landscape produced by a civilization far more sophisticated and economically integrated than any prior account had imagined. If a single 2-day LiDAR survey in 2019 could reveal an entire lost agricultural world concealed beside one of the most intensively studied ruins in the Pacific, the question that follows is self-evident: what else remains beneath the trees and beneath the water, in this and in adjacent regions, that no instrument has yet been directed toward? The answer, given what this site has already demonstrated about the gap between what is visible and what is real, is almost certainly more. Amazing discoveries. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Share this video with friends and join the discussion on what these findings could mean. Your thoughts and questions are important, so let's explore incredible mysteries together.